Sacker, the human recruit. Conclusion. The Academy's final examination was unlike anything the recruits had faced before. Instead of controlled simulations, they would be deployed to an actual crisis situation. The Deep Space Monitoring Station Omega-7 had gone silent 3 days ago, its automated distress beacon the only sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Sarah stood in the briefing room alongside the 43 recruits who had made it through 12 cycles of the most demanding military training in the galaxy. The failure rate had been brutal, nearly 60% of the original class washing out. But those who remained represented the best each species had to offer. Admiral Korathal, an ancient granite lord whose stone skin bore the scars of a dozen major conflicts, projected the situation report into the center of the room. His voice carried the weight of absolute military authority. Omega-7 was our primary monitoring station for the Void Zone, the region of space where dimensional barriers are naturally thin, he began. 3 days ago, all communication ceased. Long-range scans indicate the station is intact but dark. Your mission is reconnaissance and rescue of any survivors. The holographic display showed the massive station, a complex structure designed to house over 3,000 personnel from multiple species. Its strategic position made it one of the most important installations in this sector of space. You will operate in mixed species teams, the Admiral continued. This is not a training exercise. The threats you face will be real, and the consequences of failure extend far beyond your graduation status. Sarah found herself assigned to Team 7, commanded by Thakvor. The irony wasn't lost on her. The Vex-High who had initially shown the most contempt for humans was now leading a team that included her. The other members were Veltar the Zephyrian, Zaraleth the Luminary, and Grok the Granite Lord, the same team she had worked with in her first simulation cycle. Strange how things change, Veltar observed, her crystalline voice carrying harmonic undertones of amusement as they boarded their assault transport. Indeed, Thakvor agreed, though his mandibles clicked with nervous energy. Chen, I want your assessment of the tactical situation before we reach the station. Sarah reviewed the data files as their transport crossed the void toward Omega-7. Something about the situation bothered her, patterns in the data that didn't quite fit standard emergency scenarios. The timing is wrong, she said finally. Explain, Thakvor requested, his predator instincts recognizing the certainty in her voice. The distress beacon activated exactly 72 hours ago, but the last routine communication was 73 hours ago. That suggests the crisis occurred during the gap between communications, but the automated systems waited an hour before activating the beacon. Grok shifted his massive frame in the transport seat. System delay? No, Sarah shook her head. These are military-grade systems with redundant pathways. Delay would be measured in seconds, not hours. Something or someone delayed the activation deliberately. Zaraleth's energy patterns flickered with concern. Are you suggesting sabotage? I'm suggesting we approach this assuming the station may have been compromised by hostile forces rather than equipment failure or accident. As they approached Omega-7, their sensors confirmed Sarah's suspicions. The station was intact and fully powered, but there were no life signs detectable from their current distance. More concerning, the station's defensive systems were active and tracking their approach. This is Commander Thakvor of the Galactic Defense Force, the Vex-High transmitted on standard frequencies. Omega-7, please respond. Silence answered them across all communication channels. Sarah, Thakvor said quietly, what do you recommend? Sarah studied the sensor readings, looking for patterns that others might miss. The station's power distribution was unusual, with elevated energy signatures in sections that should have been in standby mode. The defensive systems were active, but not targeting them aggressively, suggesting automated operation rather than hostile control. There, she pointed to a section of the station's structure. Docking Bay 7 shows normal power signatures but no thermal readings. If the station was evacuated, that bay would likely be where the evacuation craft departed from. We should be able to dock there without triggering automatic defenses. The approach was tense, every member of the team ready for hostile action. But Sarah's analysis proved correct. Docking Bay 7 accepted their approach codes and allowed them to board without incident. The station's interior was a maze of corridors and chambers designed for multiple species. Emergency lighting cast everything in eerie red shadows, and the silence was absolute. Their footsteps echoed strangely in the artificial atmosphere. "Life support is functional," Veltar reported, her crystalline sensors detecting atmospheric composition. But something is wrong with the air circulation patterns. Sarah was already moving toward the nearest information terminal. "I need to access the station's logs." What she found in the computer systems made her blood run cold. The station hadn't been attacked by external forces. It had been infiltrated by something worse, a void spawn entity that had somehow crossed through the dimensional barriers the station was designed to monitor. "The creature didn't attack the station," she explained to her team as they gathered around her. "It possessed it." "The station's computer systems show that it merged with the main AI core 3 days ago." "Where is the crew?" Grok asked, his stone features grim. Sarah continued reading through the logs, her human ability to process seemingly unrelated information, giving her insights that pure computing power might miss. "They're not dead," she said slowly. "At least, not exactly. The entity has them in some kind of stasis in the central core chamber. It's using them as processing units for some kind of calculation." Thakvor's mandibles clicked rapidly. "What kind of calculation?" "Dimensional coordinates," Sarah replied, her voice tight with growing alarm. "It's mapping pathways between dimensions across the entire galaxy. This isn't just about one space station. It's about opening permanent rifts everywhere." The team looked at her with expressions ranging from concern to outright fear. The implications were staggering. If the entity succeeded, the dimensional barriers that protected normal space from the chaos of the void zone would collapse everywhere. "We have to stop it," Zaraleth said, her energy patterns shifting to combat configurations. "How do we fight something that exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously?" Veltar asked. Sarah was still studying the data, her mind racing through possibilities. The entity was powerful beyond imagination, but it was also constrained by the need to work through physical systems. And physical systems had vulnerabilities that humans were particularly good at exploiting. "We don't fight it directly," she said. "We make it impossible for it to complete its calculations." She turned to face her team, and they could see the determination in her human eyes. "The entity is using the station's crew as organic processors because their brains can handle multidimensional mathematics in ways that computer systems can't. But it needs all of them working in harmony to complete the calculation matrix." "So we disrupt the harmony," Thakvor understood immediately. "Exactly. But we have to do it without getting close enough for the entity to absorb us into the matrix." The plan Sarah developed was typically human in its approach, using misdirection and systematic problem-solving rather than direct confrontation. They would access the station's environmental systems and introduce controlled chaos into the central core chamber. Fluctuations in temperature, atmospheric pressure, and electromagnetic fields would disrupt the delicate neural synchronization the entity required. "This is insane," Grok rumbled as they prepared to implement the plan. "We're trying to outthink an entity that exists in multiple dimensions." "Maybe," Sarah agreed, "but it's thinking like a multidimensional entity. Sometimes the solution to a complex problem is surprisingly simple." They moved through the station like ghosts, avoiding the areas where the entity's influence was strongest. Sarah's tactical planning kept them ahead of the security systems that the possessed AI was using to track them. Veltar's harmonic abilities allowed them to detect the entity's presence before it could locate them. Zaraleth's energy manipulation gave them tools to overcome barriers. Grok's strength provided brute force solutions when subtlety failed, and Thakvor's predator instincts kept them alive when the entity sent its possessed security drones after them. But it was Sarah's ability to see the larger pattern that made the difference. While the others focused on immediate threats, she tracked the entity's behavior, looking for signs that their plan was working. "There," she said as they reached the Environmental Control Center. "The calculation matrix is destabilizing. The entity is having trouble maintaining synchronization with the crew." They implemented the final phase of their plan, introducing carefully calculated chaos into every system the entity relied on: temperature fluctuations, pressure variations, electromagnetic interference, even changes in the station's artificial gravity, all designed to make it impossible for the possessed crew to maintain the neural harmony the entity required. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the station, lights flickered and systems sparked as the entity struggled to maintain control. In the central core, the 3,000 crew members began to wake from their enforced stasis as the entity's hold over them weakened. But the entity wasn't defeated, merely frustrated. It began to abandon the complex calculation matrix in favor of a simpler but more destructive approach. If it couldn't map dimensional pathways across the galaxy, it would simply tear a massive rift in this location and let the chaos spread from there. "It's overloading the station's power core," Sarah reported, watching the energy readings spike beyond safe levels. "We have maybe 10 minutes before the entire structure destabilizes." That was when Admiral Korathal's voice crackled through their communication systems. "Team 7, report your status immediately." "Admiral, we've disrupted the entity's primary plan, but it's now attempting to create a catastrophic dimensional breach," Thakvor responded. "Recommend immediate evacuation of all personnel." "Negative." The Admiral's reply was firm. "Fleet Command has analyzed the situation. If that entity tears a rift here, the dimensional cascade will affect 17 star systems. Evacuation is not an option." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. 3,000 lives on the station, billions more across the affected systems, all depending on her ability to find a solution that others couldn't see. "What if we don't try to stop the rift?" she said suddenly. Her teammates stared at her in shock. "Sarah, that would be catastrophic," Zaraleth protested. "Not if we control it," Sarah explained, her mind racing through possibilities. "The entity wants to tear open dimensional barriers. What if we help it do exactly that, but in a way that traps it instead of freeing it?" She was already working at the environmental controls, modifying the chaos patterns they had introduced. "Veltar, I need you to create a harmonic resonance at exactly 47.3 terahertz. Zaraleth, can you channel energy into the station's shield generators but invert the polarity?" "That should theoretically create an energy barrier that exists in folded space," the luminary realized. "But the calculations required—" "Trust me," Sarah said, her fingers flying over the control interfaces. What happened next defied easy description. As the entity began to tear open its dimensional rift, Sarah's modifications turned the station itself into a multidimensional trap. The rift opened as the entity intended, but instead of spreading chaos into normal space, it created a contained pocket dimension that immediately began to collapse in on itself. The entity found itself caught in its own dimensional manipulation, trapped in a space that was simultaneously opening and closing, expanding and contracting. Its multidimensional nature, which had been its greatest strength, became its weakness as it struggled to exist in a space that couldn't decide what dimension it occupied. Within minutes, both the entity and the rift collapsed into nothingness, leaving only the faint spatial distortion that marked where the dimensional barriers had briefly failed. The station's crew awakened to find themselves free. their memories of the possession already fading like a half-remembered dream. Emergency systems restored full power and life support, and rescue ships arrived to evacuate the traumatized personnel. But Sarah barely noticed the celebration around her. She was slumped in a chair, exhaustion weighing on her like a physical force. The mental strain of processing multidimensional mathematics with a purely human brain had pushed her to the very edge of her capabilities. Admiral Carathel materialized in the Environmental Control Center via holographic projection, his ancient stone features showing something Sarah had never seen before. Awe. "Recruit Chen," he began, his voice carrying formal weight. "Fleet Command has reviewed the tactical data from this operation. Your solution to contain the dimensional entity was unprecedented." Sarah tried to stand but found her legs wouldn't support her. Grok steadied her with one massive hand, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I just looked for a different approach," she managed to say. "Instead of fighting what the entity wanted to do, I tried to turn its own strength against it." "Yes," the Admiral agreed. "You demonstrated strategic thinking that our best military minds failed to anticipate. You saw possibilities where others saw only problems." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried formal authority. "By order of Fleet Command, you are hereby granted immediate commissioning as Lieutenant Chen of the Galactic Defense Force. Your tactical innovations will be studied and integrated into our standard procedures." Around her, Sarah's teammates straightened to attention. Even Thakvor, whose species was notorious for its pride, showed unmistakable respect. "Furthermore," the Admiral continued, "you are assigned to the new Xenotactical Analysis Division. Your mission will be to develop unconventional solutions to problems that traditional military thinking cannot solve." As the hologram faded and rescue operations continued around them, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since her first day at the Academy. She had arrived as the representative of a species that others saw as weak and primitive. She was leaving as an officer whose tactical innovations would influence military strategy across the galaxy. "So what now, Lieutenant?" Thakvor asked, his mandibles clicking with what Sarah now recognized as amusement rather than hostility. "Now we go home," Sarah replied, finally able to stand on her own. "I have reports to write and new strategies to develop." But as they prepared to depart Omega-7, Sarah caught sight of something that made her pause. Through one of the station's observation windows, she could see the stars of the Terran system, distant but unmistakable. Earth, the world that had forged humanity in the crucible of constant challenge and adaptation. Her species might be physically weak compared to others in the galaxy. They might lack natural weapons or armor or enhanced senses, but they had something else, something that couldn't be measured in physical capabilities or technological advancement. They had the ability to look at impossible situations and find solutions that nobody else would even consider. They had the stubborn refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. They had the adaptability that came from evolving on a world that demanded constant innovation just to survive. And sometimes, Sarah thought as their transport departed for the Academy, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. The final graduation ceremony took place in the Academy's Great Hall, with representatives from dozens of species in attendance. When Admiral Carathel called Sarah's name, the applause was genuine and sustained. No longer was she the human recruit that others laughed at. She was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, the soldier who had saved 17 star systems by refusing to think like everyone else. As she accepted her commission and the ceremonial weapons that marked her as a full member of the Galactic Defense Force, Sarah caught sight of the massive apex predator who served as the Academy's ceremonial guard. The creature, a Soroth from the deepest regions of space, had witnessed thousands of graduation ceremonies. But as Sarah passed, the ancient predator did something unprecedented. It straightened to attention and offered her a formal military salute, the ultimate sign of respect from one warrior to another. The message was clear to everyone present. The human might be small, might be physically weak, might lack the obvious advantages of other species, but she had earned something far more valuable than physical power. She had earned the respect of the galaxy's greatest warriors through the simple act of proving that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could face was someone who refused to accept the limitations that others took for granted. The laughter had stopped. The respect had begun. And Sarah Chen, lieutenant in the Galactic Defense Force and proof that humans belonged among the stars, was just getting started.